fact that you rooted it early on in American history, and how that we tried to have our early understandings of how masculinity formed. And it's different than what we see today. You actually mentioned that it was a very positive view. The husband and father had a very positive view in the family, and people wrote about that. But how did we, or go ahead, elaborate on that. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, so I do start, I kind of limit myself to American history because otherwise the book would be too big. But it also gives me the opportunity to, in a sense, start with Christianity, and not just in the abstract, but you can see how it was actually lived out in the colonial era, because so many people were Christian at the time. And so the social expectations of manhood were very much geared towards caretaking and responsibility. And it was easier to live it out because before the Industrial Revolution, families were together 24 hours a day, right? Husbands are working with their wives all day. They're training their children. They're working side by side on the family farm, in the family industry, the family shop. And so fathers were intimately involved with their families. And so the concepts of masculinity were much more geared toward having responsibility for your family. And not only that, but a very common phrase at the time was that you also were supposed to be fathers of the community. You know, you're supposed to bring that fathering ethos out into the community. The definition of authority at that time had a very specific meaning. It meant who has responsibility for the common good. So, you know, each individual naturally looks out for their own good. I look out for what's good for me, you look out for what's good for you, but who looks out for the common good of the marriage, the family, the church, civil society, and so on? And that's what authority was for. It was, you know, the favorite word at the time was disinterested, meaning whoever was in authority did not look out for his own self-interest. He looked out for the interests of the whole. So it was a very positive view of authority as well. How did we lose that? The turning point was the Industrial Revolution, because it meant two things. First of all, work was taken out of the home. So men had to follow their work out of the home into factories and offices. And for the first time, they were not working with their families, with people they loved and had a moral bond with. Instead, they were working as individuals in competition with other men. And you already in the 19th century, you see the rhetoric start to change as people protest that the men are changing, that men are losing that caretaking mentality. When they're working as individuals, you know, it feels a lot more like I have to look out for number one, right? I have to be aggressive and ambitious and acquisitive and, you know, pushing myself forward in the struggle for survival. And so people began to write about it. You know, men are kind of losing their ethical stance. As one letter to the editor in a newspaper put it at the time, men are selling their souls for mammon, you know, mammon for wealth.
Right.
And it said in the process, it said the American man is losing his soul. But at the same time, so that was the structural changes that were going on. And then at the same time, American society was being secularized, because after the Industrial Revolution, there arose a huge public sphere, you know, business, industry, factories, banks, financial institutions, academia, universities, and the state. And people began to say, well, these big institutions should be run by scientific principles, by which they meant primarily value-free. And so, in other words, the language began to be, don't bring your private values into the public square, which is what we still hear today. And so men in particular then are being exposed to a secular education, working in a secular environment, and they begin to have a more secularized definition of masculinity. So it was the two things. There was a structural change, and then there was the secularization. And between the two of them, we kind of lost the biblical understanding of masculinity.